I would give the floor to Mr. Seung Ryeol Kim, who is an advisor to the Secretary General of AWEB, the Association of World Election Bodies. His topic is Cleavages to Nation Building Through Free Elections, Korean Case. Challenges to, not cleavages, challenges to nation building through free elections, Korean case. Sorry. You have the floor, Mr. Kim.
Good afternoon. As introduced, my name is Seung Kim. I'm working for AWEB, the Association of World Election Bodies. I'm very pleased to be here doing my presentation. And today my presentation is about the Korean case of nation building. And I believe it is generally agreed that nation building is a modern concept. Nation building, nation state, election, or citizenship, they are modern concepts. They are byproducts of modernism. And those are the concepts with civil society at the center of them. And in my presentation, I'd like to highlight the importance of civil society in building a nation. And actually, in Korean, we call it 시민사회, but when I translate this into English, I couldn't find very good equivalent word for this. And civil society could be the best equivalent. But this is not a particular group of people. This is a kind of force of the people. It gives a collective voice, and it is organized in a form of people power movement. And anyway, civil society is a very important concept, and it also means civil rights, including suffrage. So my point, the core of my argument in my presentation is that without civil society, without strong, healthy civil society, nation building is not possible. If they build a nation without civil society, it could be a fake nation building. And civil rights and war. Then how do we obtain civil rights? Civil rights are won in negotiation with a state. And an extreme case of this negotiation takes place during war. And I'd like to borrow this idea, the proposition war makes a state by Charles Tilly, because war, the Korean War, played a very important role in establishing the current Korea. And according to this proposition, war has two roles in building a nation. The first role is protecting the people inside from outside enemies and eliminating the rivals within the territory. And the state becomes completed as a subject with monopolistic supremacy in the society as a political community with a monopoly of the legitimate use of physical force. So simply speaking, before building a state is not a fixed idea. Maybe there are many different forces which are potential states. When there is war, the most dominant force can dominate the legitimate use of physical force, such as the army, the police, security agencies. So this is one of the roles war plays in building a nation. But in my presentation, the second role is more important. So in carrying out a war effort, the state protects its citizens for the price of exploiting resources. So in this process, the state negotiates with the civil society. And this is the way the civil society is formed and growing, and it increases its civil rights, including suffrage. So war plays two important roles in building a nation. So like I said earlier, I borrowed this idea because it's important in understanding the current nation building of Korea. So if I may apply the concept of the civil society and the role of war to the Korean case, Korea became independent from Japanese colonial rule in 1945. And at the time, political elites in the South wanted to establish a separatist state in the South. But of course, not only domestic political elites. At the time, South Korea was under trusteeship of the United States, and the northern part was under the trusteeship of the Soviet Union. But at the time, there was no civil society formed. So establishing a separate state had no support from grassroots. But anyway, ROK, South Korea, was established in 1948 with no popular support, violently suppressing popular residents. But the state had to justify the separate state itself. So domestic elites in the US, they held the first general election in 1948. But again, at the time, there was no civil society formed. According to the survey, very, very few people seemed to want a separate state at the time. But they were forced to participate in the first election. So 74% of the population were registered in the election, and among them, 91% were coercively registered. So they were given suffrage. However, it was not a creation of citizens' rights, but a top-down mobilization. So back to the proposition, war makes a state. So the Korean War brought about the growth of the state's coercive organizations, such as the army, the police, security agencies, and it increased its national capability in controlling the society. However, the war did not contribute to the formation of civil society. There was no civil society formed in those days. So nation building of half Korea was made not based on the growth of civil society or civil rights or free elections, but by coercive mobilization, punishment, and massacre. So it was not until the late 1980s that a civil society was formed in South Korea. But having civil society took massive popular sacrifice and massive protests with the university students. So it was really costly. So this is one of the examples of popular protests. And this one is, again, another representative example of popular protests. Then what were the backgrounds of the sudden growth of civil society? First of all, maybe economic growth. Economic growth broadened the size of the middle class. And at the time, there was a collapse of the communist bloc. Military governments, anti-communist propaganda weakened. So before Korea became divided, Korean identity was based on its ethnicity. But the separate state of the South, they replaced this ethnic identity with invented tradition of anti-communism. But because of the collapse of the communist bloc, the logic for anti-communism, for the national identity, weakened. And the civil society achieved direct presidential election. And with this achievement, they also made it possible to transfer power from military government to civilian government. And they also achieved institutionalization of the protection of civil rights and free elections. Now I'm very proudly and confidently saying that now South Korea and the people, they are really enjoying their civil rights and free elections. So this was when nation building of South Korea took place. It was not in 1948 when there was no civil society, but only the domestic political elites, they led nation building with no support, with no formation of civil society. So I believe this time was the time that South Korean nation or nation state was built. But in the beginning, I said nation building is a modern concept. However, as I said, Korean identity, national identity, is based on its ethnicity. So therefore, to Koreans, nation is not a modern concept, but rather an ethnic concept. So according to the constitution of the ROK, South Korea, people in the north are the same citizens as the people in the south. And the ground of this, again, is ethnicity. So now, I briefly talked about the nation building process of South Korea, but it's half nation building. So to build the entire nation, but the nation building process is still going on. But problem, the title of my presentation was about the challenges. What is it? I highlighted the importance of civil society in nation building process. However, in North Korea, there's no civil society. No civil society means no civil rights, no free elections. Then how can we build a nation without any civil society? This is a photo taken during the recent summit. It looks like the two different states have made a very important and dramatic improvement in their relationship. But can this make nation building of Korea? Because I have witnessed the same thing twice already. Not only myself, but the whole world witnessed this kind of summit in 2000 and 2007. But still, there is no civil society, meaning no civil rights, no possibility of free elections. So that's why I'm quite skeptical about nation building of Korea. Again, because of there is no civil society and the support from the people in the north. Okay, so these are the challenges. Maybe I want to hear from you. Maybe your advice. Okay, thank you.